I heard my own name in a voice note that was never meant for me. The phone was still in my hand when the message ended, but I couldn't remember pressing play. For a few seconds, I just sat there at my kitchen island, staring at the screen while the ice in my glass of water slowly melted, tapping faintly against the sides like a quiet clock counting down to something I didn't understand yet. She'll sign it. She always does. Emma doesn't read legal stuff anyway. My breath caught in my throat. That was my brother's voice. Clear, calm, certain. Then my sister-in-law's voice followed, softer but sharper in a way that made my stomach tighten. And once the trust amendment is filed, her share transfers automatically. She won't even realize what she signed. The audio stopped, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the words themselves. I didn't move, not right away. The dishwasher hummed in the background. The scent of coffee I'd brewed an hour earlier lingered in the air, slightly bitter now that it had gone cold. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere down the street, ordinary life continuing as if nothing had just cracked open inside my chest. My name. They had said my name like I wasn't family, like I was a problem to be managed. Not a sister, not a daughter, not a person, just a signature. I replayed the voice note. Once, then again, then a third time, even though each replay made my hands shake worse. It had come from Claire, my older brother Daniel's wife. No text, no explanation, just the voice note, sent at 2:14 p.m. Probably meant for someone else. Definitely not meant for me. But it landed in my inbox anyway. And in less than 30 seconds, the version of my family I had trusted for 38 years quietly began to unravel. Before that afternoon, my life had been steady, predictable in the kind of way that doesn't make headlines, but builds a quiet sense of safety over time. I'm 42 years old, divorced, no kids. I work remotely as a financial coordinator for a small nonprofit, which means most of my days are spent at this very kitchen island with a laptop, spreadsheets, and a rotating cycle of coffee mugs I never quite get around to washing on time. I live in my late mother's house in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. White siding, a creaky back porch, wind chimes that sing every time the breeze passes through the maple tree my dad planted when I was 10. After Mom passed last year, the house didn't just become my home, it became my responsibility and my inheritance. Technically, the estate was divided between me and my older brother, Daniel. That included the house, a small lake cabin our parents bought during their retirement years, and a modest investment trust my father had set up decades ago for the kids. Daniel had insisted from the beginning that we handle everything together. He'd said gently during one of those first difficult weeks after the funeral, his hand resting on my shoulder while relatives moved quietly through the living room. You've been through enough. Let me deal with the legal stuff. You don't need that stress right now. At the time, I felt relieved, grateful even. Daniel has always been the organized one, the dependable one, the type who color codes calendars and reads contracts line by line. Growing up, he was the kid who reminded our parents about deadlines and corrected waiters when the bill was wrong. I was the softer one, the trusting one, the one who believed that love made things simple. Claire, his wife, was always polished, warm in a careful, practiced way. She hugged me tightly at the funeral, brought over casseroles, and insisted on helping me sort through Mom's old belongings. You shouldn't have to do this alone, she'd said, squeezing my hand in the hallway while holding a box of photo albums. We're family. And I believed her. Every Sunday after that, they came over. I'd cook something simple, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans the way Mom used to make them with too much butter. Daniel would sit at the table, reviewing estate documents on his tablet between bites, occasionally updating me in that calm, reassuring tone that made everything sound manageable. Probate is almost done. The trust just needs a minor update, some routine paperwork, nothing complicated. He said things like that often, and every time I nodded, because I trusted him, because he was my brother, because grief makes you lean on familiar voices without questioning where they're guiding you. Looking back now, I realize how carefully normal everything felt. The casual check-ins, the gentle reminders, the stack of documents he'd occasionally slide across the table with a sticky note that said, "Sign here, Em." I signed most of them without hesitation. Not blindly, just trustingly. There's a difference, or at least I used to think there was. 2 weeks before the voice note, Daniel had come over on a Tuesday afternoon instead of Sunday. That alone should have stood out to me. He never came on weekdays. I remember he stood in the doorway for a longer moment than usual, glancing around the house like he was measuring something invisible. "Working?" he asked. "Always," I replied, smiling as I closed my laptop. He laughed softly, then set his leather folder on the kitchen island, the same folder he'd been bringing since Mom passed. Organized, neat, professional. "I've got a small amendment related to the family trust," he said casually, flipping it open. "Just administrative updates, legal language cleanup mostly." I frowned slightly. "Amendment?" "Yeah," he said quickly, already turning the pages toward me. "Lawyer recommended it. Standard stuff." Claire, who had come in behind him, placed a container of lemon loaf on the counter like a peace offering. "You know how attorneys are," she said lightly. "They love paperwork." The document had been thick, dense, full of legal phrasing that made my eyes glaze over after the first paragraph. Daniel tapped a line near the bottom. "Just sign here and here. It keeps everything streamlined between us." Between us. I remember hesitating for half a second, not because I suspected anything, but because something in his tone felt rehearsed. Still, I picked up the pen, because he was my brother, because we were handling this together, because family doesn't trick family, right? Now, sitting alone in my kitchen with that accidental voice note echoing in my ears, a slow, cold realization began to creep into my thoughts. Once the trust amendment is filed, her share transfers automatically. She won't even realize what she signed. My stomach dropped. The amendment, the one from 2 weeks ago. The pen slipped from my countertop and clattered softly onto the tile floor. For the first time since Mom died, the house didn't feel like a place of comfort. It felt like a place where something had happened right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. Or worse, I had seen it, and trusted it anyway. I didn't pick the pen up from the floor right away. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the spot where it had rolled, as if the answer to everything might somehow be lying next to it on the tile. The house felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every small sound feel louder than it should be. The refrigerator hummed. The wind chimes outside brushed together softly, and my phone still rested on the counter like it had done nothing wrong. I reached for it again, my fingers slower this time, almost cautious, like the device itself had betrayed me. I opened the voice note once more. She always does. Emma doesn't read legal stuff anyway. A faint ringing filled my ears. Emma. They hadn't said my sister. They hadn't said she. They said my name, like they were discussing a transaction. Detached, strategic, measured. Not loving, not protective, just certain. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the counter, but the words stayed with me, echoing in the back of my mind in a way that made my chest feel tight. Because the truth is, Daniel wasn't wrong about one thing. I didn't read legal documents carefully, not because I was careless, but because I trusted him to. Growing up, Daniel had always been the responsible one. Even now, at 48, he still spoke in that steady, grounded tone that made problems sound solvable and decisions sound safe. After Dad passed 5 years ago, he handled most of the estate logistics then, too. Bank transfers, insurance claims, tax filings. I remember telling friends how lucky I was to have a brother who took care of things. And he did. Or at least that's what I believed. After Mom's passing last year, everything blurred together into grief, paperwork, and quiet routines that helped me stay functional. Mornings started the same way: coffee, emails, a quick walk to the mailbox, then work calls from my laptop at the kitchen island. Around noon, I'd water the plants Mom used to fuss over. By late afternoon, I'd usually call my daughter Lily, who lived in Seattle and worried about me more than she let on. "You're not overdoing it, right?" she'd ask every Sunday. "I'm fine," I'd always say. And most days, I truly believed it. Daniel and Claire became part of that routine. They showed up regularly, predictably, comfortingly. Claire would bring baked goods or fresh flowers. Daniel would bring updates. He never rushed me, never pressured me openly. That was the thing. Everything about him remained calm, controlled, kind even. Which is why, as the days passed after hearing that voice note, the hardest part wasn't anger. It was doubt. Doubt about my own judgment. 3 days after the message, Daniel texted me like nothing had happened. "Hey, Em, lawyer finalized the trust paperwork. We'll need one more signature soon. I can stop by this week." My heart skipped when I read it. One more signature. The words felt heavier now, different. Before, they would have sounded routine. Now, they sounded calculated. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Sure, whenever works." My reply was simple, neutral, careful. I didn't mention the voice note. Not yet. Part of me wanted to call him immediately and demand an explanation, but another part, the quieter, more cautious part, held me back. Because what if I misunderstood? What if there was some legal technicality I didn't grasp? What if confronting him without certainty broke something that couldn't be repaired? That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked the way older houses do after midnight, pipes settling, floorboards whispering under invisible shifts in temperature. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, replaying conversations from the past year. Every document, every signature, every reassuring smile. And then, something small but unsettling surfaced in my memory. About a month ago, Claire had insisted on organizing Mom's office. At the time, it had felt helpful. "Paperwork gets overwhelming," she said gently, kneeling beside the filing cabinet. "Let me sort the important documents into folders for you." She worked quietly for nearly 2 hours that day, humming softly, occasionally asking where certain items should go. I remember noticing how carefully she separated legal papers from personal ones. Too carefully, maybe. I brushed the thought aside then. Now it returned with uncomfortable clarity. Had she seen the original trust documents? Had she known exactly what was written before any amendments were made? A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the blankets. For the first time, I got out of bed and walked down the hallway to Mom's old office. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and paper, the same scent that used to cling to her sweaters. The filing cabinet stood against the wall, exactly where it always had, organized, neat, efficient, just like Claire left it. My hands hesitated over the drawer handle. I wasn't snooping, I told myself. I was verifying. There's a difference. Slowly, I opened the top drawer, and folders labeled in Claire's tidy handwriting stared back at me. Insurance, property deeds, bank statements, trust documents. My pulse quickened. I pulled the last folder out and carried it to the desk, sitting in the same chair Mom used to sit in when she paid bills on Sunday evenings. The papers inside were thicker than I remembered, carefully clipped, chronologically arranged. The original trust document sat near the back. I flipped through them slowly, my eyes scanning the legal language more carefully than I ever had. And there it was, a section outlining asset distribution. 50% to Daniel, 50% to me. Clear, direct, equal. Exactly what Mom had told us. Exactly what I had always believed. My throat tightened. Then I reached the front of the folder. And that's when I saw it. A newer document, different formatting, different date, and a small line at the top that made my stomach drop. Trust Amendment, Revised Beneficiary Allocation. My fingers trembled as I lifted the page. The paper felt heavier than it should have. My eyes scanned the text slowly, carefully this time. 40% to Daniel, 10% to me, 50% held under administrative oversight, managed by the acting trustee. The acting trustee. Daniel. The room felt suddenly smaller. My heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears as a quiet realization settled over me like a weight I could no longer ignore. This wasn't just paperwork cleanup. This wasn't just legal language. This was redistribution. And if the voice note was true, then they weren't just planning something. They had already started. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the amendment in my hands, and for the first time since hearing that accidental voice note, a deeper question rose inside me, one far more painful than suspicion. How long had this been happening right in front of me? And more importantly, how many times had I already signed something that quietly erased my place in my own parents' legacy? I didn't cry when I saw the amendment. That surprised me more than anything. Instead, I just sat there in my mother's chair, holding the document with both hands like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. The paper was smooth, crisp, official. The kind of paper that carries quiet authority. The kind people rarely question because it looks legitimate. But legitimacy and truth are not always the same thing. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over the page, and I leaned closer, reading every line slowly, carefully, as if my eyes might have misunderstood the first time. Revised beneficiary allocation. The words felt sterile, clinical, almost polite, like a gentle way of saying, less for you. I traced the date at the top with my finger. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? My stomach tightened. That was the same week Daniel had come over on that random Tuesday, the same day he placed the folder on my kitchen island, the same day Claire stood beside him, smiling softly while setting lemon loaf on the counter like nothing in the world was unusual. And the same day I signed where he pointed. A dull ache spread across my chest, slow and heavy. Not sharp anger, not yet. Just the quiet ache of realization. I turned the page over, looking for my signature, and there it was, at the bottom. Clean, familiar, undeniably mine. The sight of it made my fingers go cold, because I didn't remember signing a beneficiary reallocation. I remembered signing an administrative amendment. The difference between those two things wasn't small. It was everything. The house creaked softly as the heater clicked on, filling the office with a low hum. I became suddenly aware of how late it was. The digital clock on Mom's old bookshelf read 1:47 a.m. Nearly 2 hours had passed since I walked into the room. 2 hours of reading, rereading, cross-checking dates. And with each minute, one truth settled deeper into my bones. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planning. Careful, quiet, strategic planning. My mind drifted back to the voice note again. She won't even realize what she signed. A small, involuntary laugh escaped my throat, dry and hollow, because they were almost right. I hadn't realized. Not then, not until now. I pressed my palm against the desk, grounding myself as a wave of memories began resurfacing, tiny moments that once felt harmless, but now rearranged themselves into something far more unsettling. Like the time Claire insisted we digitize all estate files. It's safer, she had said cheerfully, sitting beside me with her laptop, in case anything gets lost. She had scanned everything herself. Every document, every signature page, every original file. Or the time Daniel gently discouraged me from contacting the estate lawyer directly. No need to overwhelm him, he said with a reassuring smile. I'm already in regular contact. It'll just complicate things if we both start emailing. At the time, it sounded reasonable. Now it sounded isolating, strategic even. My chest tightened. Had they been slowly positioning themselves as the only source of information? The only interpreters of what was normal? The only voices I trusted when it came to my own inheritance? I closed the folder and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows from the lamp trembled across the paint. Grief makes you vulnerable in ways people rarely talk about. After losing Mom, I wasn't thinking about legal language or asset percentages. I was thinking about her empty chair at the dining table, her recipes still taped inside kitchen cabinets, her voicemail greeting I still couldn't bring myself to delete. And while I was busy surviving loss, someone else had been revising paperwork. The next morning felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight filtered through the curtains in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgled, birds chirped outside like the world hadn't shifted overnight. But inside me, something had changed permanently. I moved slower, quieter, more observant. I checked my phone first thing. A new message from Claire. Hi, Emma. Did you get the voice note I sent yesterday? That was meant for my cousin about something unrelated! My breath stilled. Unrelated. The word sat there on the screen like a fragile excuse. I read the message 3 times. Not once did she apologize for the content. Not once did she clarify what the something was. Just a casual deflection. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Yes, I got it." I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I didn't react emotionally, because something inside me had shifted from hurt to awareness, and awareness is quieter than anger. A minute later, she replied, "Oops, wrong chat. Happens when I'm multitasking, LOL." I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady but heavy. Wrong chat. That meant the message was definitely intended for someone, just not me, which raised a new question that made my stomach tighten. Who were they discussing my inheritance with? Later that afternoon, Daniel called. Not texted, called. That alone made my senses sharpen. "Hey, Em," he said warmly, his voice as calm as ever. "You doing okay? Haven't heard much from you this week." I pressed the phone to my ear and walked slowly toward the window, watching a neighbor push a stroller down the sidewalk. "I'm fine," I replied. A small pause, too small for most people to notice, but I noticed. "Good." He said I was thinking of stopping by tomorrow evening. The lawyer finalized the last trust adjustment. Just one more signature and we're completely done with all estate matters. Trust adjustment, not amendment, not reallocation, adjustment. The careful wording made my grip on the phone tighten. "What kind of adjustment?" I asked gently. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Just technical stuff," he said smoothly. "Tax efficiency, asset management structure, boring legal language. Nothing that changes anything between us." Nothing that changes anything between us. My eyes drifted to the folder still sitting on the dining table. 40%, 10%, trustee control. Everything had already changed, and he knew it. The silence between us stretched just long enough to feel heavy. Then he chuckled softly. "You know how lawyers are, Em. They overcomplicate everything. I'll explain it when I come by." Explain it? After I sign it? Or before? I swallowed slowly, keeping my voice steady. "Sure, tomorrow evening works." "Perfect," he said quickly, relief almost too subtle to detect. "I'll bring the documents." After the call ended, I stood by the window for a long time, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. I looked the same. Same face, same home, same life. But inside, a quiet clarity was forming. This was no longer about confusion or suspicion or even just money. This was about trust, the kind built over decades, the kind that once broken doesn't shatter loudly, it erodes quietly. And tomorrow evening, my brother was coming over with documents he expected me to sign. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning to sign anything. I was planning to listen very carefully. Because sometimes people reveal their true intentions not when they think you're watching, but when they believe you're still trusting them. And I had a feeling that tomorrow's visit wasn't going to be ordinary. The next evening arrived too quietly. That was the first thing I noticed. No storm, no dramatic tension in the air, no visible sign that something significant was about to unfold. Just the soft glow of sunset spilling across the kitchen floor and the faint ticking of the wall clock that suddenly sounded louder than usual. I kept the house exactly the way it always was when Daniel visited. Clean counters, fresh coffee brewed, a plate of store-bought cookies arranged neatly on a small ceramic dish my mother used for guests. Routine can be a mask, and that evening I needed a mask more than ever. At 6:12 p.m., his car pulled into the driveway. Right on time. He had always been punctual. I watched through the window as he stepped out of the car, holding the same leather folder tucked under his arm. Claire followed behind him, smoothing down her coat and glancing briefly toward the house with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, my chest tightened, because if I hadn't heard that voice note, if I hadn't opened that filing cabinet, I would have opened the door with nothing but trust. Instead, I opened it with awareness. "Hey, Em," Daniel said warmly as I pulled the door open. He leaned in for a brief hug, the same familiar gesture he had done my entire life. It felt normal, familiar, almost comforting. Almost. Claire hugged me next, her arms light around my shoulders. "You look tired," she said softly, studying my face for a second too long. "I didn't sleep much," I replied honestly. Not a lie, just not the whole truth. They stepped inside, and the scent of Claire's perfume drifted into the hallway. Floral, subtle, carefully chosen. Daniel walked straight toward the kitchen like he always did, placing the leather folder on the island with practiced ease. "I won't take too much of your time," he said, unbuttoning his coat. "Just a few final signatures and we're officially done with the estate process." The word final landed heavily in my mind. Done. Closed. Settled. I poured coffee into 3 mugs, my hands steady despite the quiet storm inside my chest. Claire picked up one of the cookies, smiling politely. "You always keep this house so warm," she said, looking around. "It still feels like your mom is here somehow." I nodded faintly. "She is, in the details." For a brief second, no one spoke. Then Daniel opened the folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper felt unusually loud in the quiet kitchen. He pulled out a stack of documents, tapping them lightly on the counter to align the edges. "Okay," he began casually, flipping to the signature page with smooth familiarity. "This is just the trust adjustment we discussed. It streamlines asset management and avoids unnecessary tax complications." His tone was calm, professional, rehearsed. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I leaned slightly against the counter and asked gently, "What exactly is being adjusted?" He didn't look up right away. Just for a second. But I saw it, that tiny pause, that microscopic hesitation. Then he smiled and tapped the document again. "Just administrative structure. Basically, it allows me to manage the trust assets more efficiently on behalf of both of us." On behalf of both of us. The phrasing was careful, safe, strategic. "And the beneficiary percentages?" I asked quietly. This time, he did look up, fully, directly. And in that moment, something shifted in his eyes. Not panic, not guilt, but calculation. "They're essentially the same," he said smoothly. "It just restructures distribution timing. Legal technicalities, Em, nothing that affects your actual inheritance in a meaningful way." Claire nodded beside him, sipping her coffee. "It's honestly boring legal language. she added lightly. Lawyers love overcomplicating simple family matters. Simple. Family matters. I studied both of them silently for a few seconds. Then slowly I reached into the drawer behind me, not for the pen, but for the printed copy of the amendment I had taken from Mom's office the night before. I placed it gently on the counter between us. The air in the kitchen changed instantly. Not dramatically, but perceptibly, like a room losing oxygen. I found this in Mom's filing cabinet, I said calmly. Daniel's hand, which had been resting on his folder, went still. Claire's smile faded, just slightly. That's the earlier draft, Daniel said quickly, too quickly. Legal documents go through multiple revisions. I tilted my head slightly. This one says 40% to you, 10% to me, and 50% under trustee control. My voice remained even, measured. And the trustee listed is you. Silence. Heavy. Thick. Unavoidable. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire set her mug down very carefully. That's not finalized, she said softly. I met her gaze. Then why does it have my signature on it? The question lingered in the air like a fragile glass object no one wanted to touch. Daniel exhaled slowly and ran his hand over the back of his neck, a gesture I hadn't seen since we were teenagers, and he was caught in a lie about sneaking out past curfew. Emma, he began, his voice gentler now, lower. You're misunderstanding the structure. Am I? I asked quietly. Another pause, longer this time, more revealing. He leaned forward slightly, placing both hands on the counter. The trust isn't being taken from you, he said carefully. It's being managed more strategically. You don't deal with investments. You don't handle property logistics. This setup protects the assets long term. Protects. The word stung more than accusation would have. So, reducing my share to 10% is protection? I asked. Claire inhaled sharply. It's not about reduction, she said, her tone soft but controlled. It's about consolidation for efficiency. Efficiency. Consolidation. Administrative control. Every word sounded professional, logical, justified, and yet something underneath them felt deeply personal. I folded my hands together, my voice still calm. I heard the voice note, Claire. That was the moment everything cracked. Her eyes widened. Daniel's face went completely still. I wasn't supposed to, I continued quietly, but I did, and I heard both of you discussing my signature, my share, and how I wouldn't realize what I signed. The silence that followed was no longer polite. It was raw, unmasked. For the first time that evening, Daniel didn't immediately respond, and in that silence, the truth began revealing itself, not through shouting, not through dramatic confession, but through the absence of denial. Daniel didn't deny it. That was the first real answer I received that night. Not a confession, not an apology, not even an excuse. Just silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than any explanation. Claire was the first to move. She straightened in her chair, folding her hands together on the table like she was preparing for a difficult but necessary conversation. You weren't meant to hear that, she said softly. The honesty of that sentence hit harder than any lie could have. Not that it wasn't true, not that you misunderstood, just you weren't meant to hear it. I let out a slow breath. That's not the part that concerns me, I replied quietly. Daniel finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of the easy warmth he had been using all evening. Emma, we were trying to simplify things. Simplify. Another careful word. I shook my head slightly. You reduced my inheritance to 10%. It's more complicated than that, he said quickly. Then explain it, I replied, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since he walked in. The room felt smaller, heavier, The ticking clock behind us suddenly sounded intrusive, like it was witnessing something deeply private. Daniel leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "You've never been involved in financial management," he said, choosing each word with precision. "After Mom passed, the estate included property taxes, maintenance costs, trust investments, and legal responsibilities. Someone had to actively manage all of it. And that someone had to be you?" I asked. Claire answered before he could. "You live here, Emma. You work from home. You prefer stability. Daniel handles high-level financial decisions. It just made sense to structure the trust under a single managing authority." I watched her carefully. Her tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. It was calm, rational, almost maternal. And somehow, that made it more painful. "So you decided what made sense for my share," I said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We didn't take anything from you," he said. "The assets are still within the family trust." "Under your control," I replied. He didn't argue, didn't correct me, didn't even soften the statement. That silence again. Heavy, confirming. I reached for the amendment document and tapped the page lightly. This was signed under the explanation of a technical update, not a redistribution. His eyes flickered down to the paper, then back to me. "It is a technical update, a restructuring." I gave a small, tired smile. "You said I wouldn't realize what I signed." Claire flinched. Daniel looked away for the first time since he walked in. And that was when something inside me finally shifted from confusion into clarity. "I trusted you," I said softly. Not accusing, not dramatic, just honest. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than anything else I had said that evening. Daniel rubbed his temples slowly. "This isn't betrayal, Emma. It's practicality." The word landed like a quiet slap. "Practicality," I repeated. "Yes," he continued, leaning forward again. "Look at the reality. You're not married. You don't have dependents living here. You don't manage investments. The lake property requires renovation. The trust funds need active growth. If everything stayed split equally but unmanaged, the estate would slowly lose value." I stared at him. And the solution was to quietly change the distribution? His voice hardened slightly. The solution was to protect long-term family wealth. Family wealth. Not my inheritance, not Mom's wishes. Family wealth. Claire placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We weren't trying to hurt you," she said softly. "We genuinely believed this was the smartest structure. You would still live here, still benefit. Nothing in your daily life would change." That sentence echoed in my mind. Nothing in your daily life would change, which meant they assumed something deeply personal, that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't question, that my role in the family legacy was passive, manageable, contained. I leaned back slowly, folding my arms across my chest. "So the plan," I said calmly, "was to let me sign legal amendments without fully explaining that my control and share were being reduced." Daniel's silence stretched again. Then, finally, he spoke the sentence that revealed everything. "You trust me more than you trust legal jargon." The room went completely still, because he wasn't wrong, and that truth hurt more than the deception itself. Memories rushed in all at once. Every time he said, "Just sign here, Em." Every time Claire reassured me, "It's standard paperwork." Every time I chose emotional trust over careful reading because grief had made me tired of decisions. I wasn't stupid. I was grieving, and they knew it. That voice note, who was it meant for? Claire hesitated, then sighed. "My cousin. Her husband is a real estate attorney. We were asking for a second opinion on trust restructuring." Second opinion. Not legal transparency with me, not discussion with me. a private consultation about my inheritance, without me. And the part where you said I wouldn't realize? I asked. Her eyes softened, but she didn't look away. That was careless wording, she admitted. Daniel finally looked at me again, his expression no longer defensive, but firm. We didn't think you'd object, he said. A small, hollow laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You didn't think I'd notice. No, he corrected quietly. We didn't think it would matter to you as much as it clearly does. That sentence settled deep in my chest, not because it was loud, but because it revealed something far more painful than greed. They hadn't seen me as an equal decision maker. They had seen me as someone to be managed, protected from complexity, guided without full disclosure, restructured without confrontation, and all under the comforting disguise of family responsibility. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. For 3 weeks, I said calmly, you both sat in this house, drank my coffee, discussed paperwork with me, while knowing my share had already been reduced. Neither of them spoke. Not a denial, not an interruption, just quiet acceptance. And in that silence, the final piece of truth settled into place. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a plan. Careful, gradual, intentional. Not explosive betrayal, but calculated, quiet control. I looked at my brother, the same man who used to hold my hand crossing the street when we were children, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not just as family, but as someone who made a decision about me instead of with me. And that realization hurt more than any legal document ever could. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. And I didn't throw the documents across the room the way a younger version of me might have imagined doing in a moment like that. Instead, I did something much quieter. I sat back down. That seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. Because calm in moments of betrayal is not weakness. It is clarity. The clock ticked steadily on the wall as I folded the amendment paper and placed it neatly beside Daniel's folder. My movements were slow, deliberate, controlled in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. You should take these back, I said gently, sliding the unsigned documents toward him. Daniel blinked. Emma, we still need... I'm not signing anything tonight, I interrupted, my tone still soft but firm. The air shifted, not aggressively, decisively. Claire leaned forward slightly. Maybe we can explain the structure more clearly. No, I said quietly. What I need now isn't another explanation. It's independent verification. That word, independent, landed heavily. Daniel's posture stiffened almost immediately. You don't trust me to handle the estate? He asked. The question wasn't loud, but it carried something deeper. Hurt, defensiveness, and beneath it, a subtle fear. I met his eyes calmly. I trusted you enough to sign legal amendments without reading them carefully, I replied. That trust has already been used. Silence filled the kitchen again. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. We never intended to deceive you, she said softly. I believe you intended to avoid resistance, I answered. That was the first moment Daniel's composure cracked. His shoulders dropped just slightly, and he let out a long breath. Emma, he said, his voice quieter now, less polished. You're making this sound malicious. It wasn't. We were thinking long-term, structurally, strategically. I nodded once. And strategically, I said, you chose not to fully disclose a redistribution of inheritance to the person being affected by it. He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to argue without denying facts. That night after they left, the house felt different. Not empty, not broken, just honest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel confused. I felt alert, and clarity, even when painful, has a strange kind of peace attached to it. The next morning, I did something I should have done months ago. I called the estate lawyer directly, Not through Daniel, not through Claire, not through family conversations wrapped in reassurance. Directly. His assistant scheduled me for a consultation that same afternoon. Sitting in that office, surrounded by neutral-colored walls and the faint smell of paper and ink, I placed every document on the desk in front of him: the original trust, the amendment, and the unsigned final adjustment Daniel had brought. He read silently for nearly 15 minutes. No interruptions, no expressions, just careful review. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "were these amendments explained to you in full before you signed the earlier document?" The question was simple, but my answer wasn't. "No," I replied. He nodded slowly. "The amendment significantly alters beneficiary distribution and trustee authority," he continued. "Legally, it is valid if signed knowingly. However, if it can be demonstrated that the nature of the amendment was misrepresented or insufficiently disclosed, it may be contestable." Contestable. The word didn't bring satisfaction. It brought gravity, because contesting it meant one thing. This was no longer just a family disagreement. It was a legal reality. 3 days later, I invited Daniel to join me at the lawyer's office. Not confrontationally, not emotionally, just formally. He arrived on time, as always. Claire came with him, quieter than usual. The lawyer spoke calmly, professionally, outlining the structural implications of the amendment in neutral legal terms. He didn't accuse, he didn't dramatize. He simply translated the paperwork into plain truth. "This amendment," he explained, "centralizes trustee power and significantly reduces Miss Carter's direct beneficiary control and distribution percentage." Daniel's expression shifted slowly as the words were spoken by someone who wasn't me. Not defensive, not angry, just exposed. "I thought it was framed as a technical restructuring," the lawyer added carefully. Claire looked down at her hands. Daniel cleared his throat. "It was meant to protect the estate," he said quietly. The lawyer nodded politely. "Protection and transparency are not mutually exclusive." That sentence settled heavily in the room. News of the situation spread quietly within the family, not through gossip, not through drama, but through careful conversations. My aunt called first, then my cousin, then, eventually, my daughter Lily. "You're not being dramatic, Mom," she said gently over the phone. "You're being responsible." That validation softened something inside me I hadn't realized was aching. Daniel, on the other hand, became noticeably quieter. Not hostile, not aggressive, just subdued. Family dinners stopped for a while. Texts became formal, short, measured. And for the first time in our adult lives, the dynamic between us shifted from unquestioned trust to cautious distance. Legally, the amendment was reviewed, formally challenged, not with vengeance, not with public accusations, but with documentation and calm persistence. In the end, the outcome wasn't explosive, it was corrective. The trust was revised again, this time with full transparency, equal distribution restored, and trustee authority shared instead of centralized. No courtroom drama, no public humiliation, just quiet legal correction. Daniel signed the revised structure without argument, and that silence told me more than any apology could have. Months passed. Slowly, life returned to its rhythm. Morning coffee, work calls, Sunday walks, wind chimes singing on the porch like they always had. Daniel and I began speaking again, though differently now, more carefully, more honestly. One evening he visited alone. No folder, no documents, just himself. "I convinced myself it was the practical thing to do," he admitted quietly, standing near the kitchen window. "Not the wrong thing, just the efficient thing." I didn't respond immediately. "Grief made everything feel urgent," he continued. "I thought managing it alone would prevent complications." "And transparency?" I asked softly. He exhaled. "I told myself you didn't need the stress." I nodded slowly. "That decision," I said gently, "removed my right to choose how much stress I could handle." He didn't argue. because he understood, and that, finally, felt like honesty. Healing didn't come suddenly. It came quietly, through boundaries, through clarity, through choosing awareness over blind trust. I didn't cut my brother out of my life, but I no longer signed anything without reading it. I no longer avoided legal conversations out of emotional fatigue. And most importantly, I no longer confused love with unquestioned compliance. Because love can exist alongside accountability. Family can make mistakes. But silence, especially informed silence, is a choice. And I chose not to remain silent about something that affected my dignity, my inheritance, and my voice. Today, when I sit at my kitchen island with my coffee growing cold beside me, the house feels peaceful again. Not because betrayal never happened, but because truth was faced calmly, corrected responsibly, and processed with dignity instead of chaos. The voice note that was never meant for me did more than expose a plan. It exposed a pattern, a quiet assumption that trust meant permission, that love meant compliance, that silence meant agreement. And perhaps the greatest lesson I learned was this. Sometimes betrayal doesn't shout. It organizes paperwork. It uses polite language. It smiles across dinner tables. But clarity, quiet, steady clarity, has a strange kind of peace of restoring balance without destroying everything in the process. I didn't win by fighting. I won by paying attention, by asking questions, by choosing truth over comfort, and by remembering that my voice, even when calm, still mattered. Sometimes I wonder, if that voice note had never been sent to me by mistake, would I still be signing documents today, trusting explanations, and slowly losing something that was always meant to be mine? It's a quiet thought, a heavy one, because betrayal in families rarely looks like cruelty at first. Sometimes it looks like protection. Sometimes it sounds like responsibility. And sometimes it hides behind the words, "I was doing this for us." But here is what I learned. Trust should never require blindness. Love should never require silence. And family decisions should never be made about you without you. So I want to ask you, gently and honestly, if you accidentally heard a conversation that revealed someone close to you was planning something behind your back, would you confront them? Or would you stay silent to keep the peace?